In every community, there are invisible lines that divide us, prejudices we inherit without questioning, and moments when we must choose between staying silent or standing up for what's right. But sometimes those moments don't happen in private conversations or quiet confrontations. They happen in front of millions of witnesses, forcing us to reveal who we really are when the mask of politeness falls away. This is the story of how one man's racist comments toward a military family on national television led to the most powerful moment of accountability in Family Feud history. How Steve Harvey drew a line that should never be crossed and enforced consequences that sent a message heard around the world. And how one family's dignity in the face of hatred became a lesson in grace, strength, and what it truly means to serve your country with honor. Before we dive into this powerful story about prejudice, courage, and the responsibility we all have to stand against bigotry whenever we witness it, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Because what you're about to see is a reminder that silence in the face of hatred is complicity, and that sometimes the most patriotic thing you can do is defend the dignity of those who have defended your freedom. The Rodriguez family from San Antonio, Texas walked onto the Family Feud stage in March 2025 with the quiet pride that comes from generations of military service. Leading the family was 40-year-old Captain Maria Rodriguez, a decorated Army officer who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and was currently stationed at Fort Sam Houston. She stood tall in her dress uniform, which she'd worn specifically to honor her late father, a Vietnam veteran who had passed away 2 years earlier. Beside her stood her husband James, a white man from Ohio who had fallen in love with Maria during their time serving together overseas, her teenage son Diego from a previous marriage, her younger sister Carmen who was currently serving in the Navy, and her mother Elena, a proud Mexican-American woman whose own father had fought in World War II. During the pre-show interviews, Maria spoke with eloquence and passion about her family's legacy of service, about how every generation of Rodriguez men and women had worn the uniform, about how her father had taught her that serving your country was the highest honor, and about how she hoped to retire from the Army in a few more years and spend more time with her family. She talked about the challenges of military life, the deployments that kept her away from her son, the injuries she'd sustained including hearing loss from an IED explosion, and the pride she felt every time she put on her uniform. On the other side of the stage stood the Patterson family from rural Georgia, led by 53-year-old Derek Patterson, a used car salesman with a loud personality and opinions he didn't hesitate to share. He was joined by his wife Linda, his adult son Derek Jr., his brother-in-law Kevin, and his nephew Tyler. During their pre-show interview, Derek had dominated the conversation, making jokes that walked the line of appropriate, making comments about traditional American values, and displaying the kind of aggressive confidence that sometimes masks insecurity. The production staff had noticed some tension during rehearsal, moments when Derek made comments under his breath that seemed directed at the Rodriguez family, but nothing clear enough to address directly. What they didn't know, what would soon become horrifyingly obvious, was that Derek Patterson harbored deep-seated racist views, particularly against Latino Americans and immigrants, views he'd managed to keep somewhat concealed during the application and vetting process, but that were about to explode into public view. The game started with the usual energy, Steve Harvey working his magic to create a fun, competitive atmosphere. The first round went smoothly, with both families giving good answers and the competition staying friendly. But in the second round, during a question about what makes someone a real American, the carefully maintained facade began to crack. When Maria gave her answer, talking about values like freedom, equality, and service to country, Derek Patterson muttered something under his breath that several people on stage heard but hoped they'd misheard. Maria, with her military-trained awareness, definitely heard it and her jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure and said nothing. Steve, focused on the game, didn't catch it, but James, Maria's husband, heard it clearly, and his face went red with barely contained anger. The comment had been a slur, a racist remark about illegals that was clearly directed at Maria despite the fact that her family had been American citizens for generations. The third round escalated the tension. The question was, name something that makes you proud to be an American. And when it was Maria's turn, she spoke from the heart about serving in the military, about the brothers and sisters she'd served with from every background and ethnicity, about how the military was the most diverse and truly equal institution in America, because what mattered was whether you could do the job and had each other's backs, not what you looked like or where your family came from. The audience applauded her answer enthusiastically, moved by her sincerity and her obvious dedication to service. But as she returned to her family's position, Derek Patterson spoke loud enough for everyone on stage to hear, his voice dripping with contempt and mockery. "Yeah, right. Bet she didn't even speak English before she joined up, probably just there for the benefits and citizenship." The studio fell silent, the kind of shocked silence that happens when someone says something so inappropriate and offensive that people can't immediately process it. Maria stopped mid-step, her back straightening further, her hands clenching at her sides. James moved toward Derek, clearly ready to defend his wife physically, but Maria put her hand on his arm, stopping him. Steve Harvey's head snapped toward Derek, his expression transforming from his usual warmth to something cold and dangerous. "Excuse me," Steve said, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "What did you just say?" Derek, perhaps not realizing the magnitude of his mistake, perhaps emboldened by years of saying such things without real consequences, doubled down instead of backing down. "I said what I said. I'm tired of people coming here, taking advantage of our military, acting like they're so patriotic when they're just—" He didn't get to finish because Steve Harvey cut him off with a gesture so commanding that Derek actually stopped talking mid-sentence. "Stop! Stop right there!" Steve walked across the stage toward Derek, and everyone could see the barely controlled anger in his movements, in his expression, in every line of his body. "Brother, I need you to hear me very clearly right now. What you just said is racist, ignorant, and completely unacceptable. But before I address you, I need to address Captain Rodriguez." Steve turned to Maria, his expression softening with respect and apology. "Ma'am, I am so sorry that you had to hear that garbage on this stage. You have served this country with honor and distinction. You have put your life on the line for the freedom that allows ignorant people to say ignorant things, and you deserve nothing but respect and gratitude from every single person in this building and everyone watching at home." Maria, maintaining her military bearing even as tears formed in her eyes, nodded her acknowledgement. Steve continued, addressing her directly. "Your family has served this nation for generations. Your father fought in Vietnam, your grandfather fought in World War II, your sister is currently serving, and you yourself have done 3 tours in Afghanistan, been injured in service to your country, and continue to wear the uniform with pride. You are more American than most people will ever be, not because of where you were born or what language your ancestors spoke, but because of the values you embody and the sacrifices you've made." The audience erupted in applause, many people standing, and Maria's mother Alina had tears streaming down her face. Then Steve turned back to Derek, and the warmth was completely gone from his expression, replaced by righteous anger. "Now let me tell you something about Captain Rodriguez that you clearly don't know or don't care about. She was born in San Antonio, Texas, which last time I checked is part of the United States. She is a 3rd-generation American citizen. She speaks perfect English, which you would know if you'd actually listened to her instead of just hearing an accent from a woman with a Spanish surname and making assumptions. And even if she had been an immigrant, even if she had come here from another country and earned her citizenship through service, that would be her right and her honor, and you would still have no business disrespecting her." Steve's voice rose with passion. "But the real issue here is not just about Captain Rodriguez. It's about the vile, racist mindset that makes you think you have the right to question someone's patriotism, someone's Americanness, based on their ethnicity or their last name. It's about the ignorance that makes you assume someone is an immigrant or illegal because they're Latino, that makes you think military service is about benefits instead of sacrifice, that makes you comfortable saying hateful things to a decorated war veteran who has done more for this country than you could ever dream of doing." The audience was completely silent now, everyone riveted by Steve's words. Derek tried to interrupt, tried to defend himself or deflect, but Steve wasn't having it. "No, you don't get to talk right now. You've said enough. Let me tell you what's going to happen next. You are done on this show. You are leaving this stage right now, and you will not be returning. I will not have racism on my stage. I will not have military veterans disrespected on my show, and I will not tolerate anyone treating another human being with the kind of contempt you just displayed." Derek's face went from defensive to angry, his true colors showing even more clearly now. "You can't kick me off for having an opinion. This is America. I have freedom of speech." Steve's response was immediate and powerful. "You absolutely have freedom of speech. What you don't have is freedom from consequences. Freedom of speech means the government can't arrest you for saying ignorant things. It doesn't mean private citizens or television shows have to give you a platform for your bigotry. And it definitely doesn't protect you from being held accountable when you use your speech to attack someone who has literally fought to protect your right to say whatever you want. He continued, his voice rising. You want to talk about what makes someone a real American? Let me tell you, it's not being born here to the right family or having the right last name or speaking only English. It's believing in the values this country was founded on: equality, justice, freedom for all people, not just people who look like you. It's respecting the men and women who serve in uniform regardless of their background. It's recognizing that America's strength has always been its diversity, that we are a nation of immigrants, and that some of the most patriotic Americans are the ones who chose this country or whose families chose this country because they believed in what it stood for. Steve turned to Derek's family members, who looked mortified. Linda, Derek Jr., Kevin, Tyler, do any of you want to defend what your family member just said? Do any of you stand with his comments? The family members shook their heads, several of them clearly embarrassed and upset. Linda spoke up, her voice shaking. I don't agree with what Derek said. That's not how I raised my son, and I'm ashamed that he would say something like that. Derek Jr. added, Captain Rodriguez, I'm so sorry. My father's views are his own, and they don't represent our whole family. Steve nodded, acknowledging their words. I appreciate you all speaking up. You can stay if you want to, or you can leave with him. That's your choice. But he needs to go now. Security had already been alerted and was standing by. Derek, realizing he was actually being removed, tried one more time to defend himself, to paint himself as the victim, to claim he was being censored for his political views. Steve shut it down immediately. This is not about politics. This is about basic human decency and respect. You insulted a military veteran based on her ethnicity, you made racist assumptions, and you did it on national television where millions of people, including children, are watching. There are no circumstances under which that is acceptable, and I will not allow it on my show. Derek was escorted off the stage by security, still protesting, still trying to justify his comments, completely unable or unwilling to recognize that his actions were the problem, not the consequences he was facing. After he left, the studio remained quiet, everyone processing what had just happened. Steve walked over to Maria and her family, and what he did next showed the depth of his character and his understanding of the moment's significance. He stood before Maria and saluted her, a civilian showing respect to someone who had served in ways he never had. Captain Rodriguez, on behalf of everyone in this building and everyone watching at home who has any decency or sense, thank you for your service. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for being willing to fight for a country where ignorant people like the one who just left have the freedom to say hateful things. You are a hero, and you deserve to be treated as such. Maria, her military composure finally cracking, began to cry, and her family surrounded her in support. Steve continued, addressing her whole family. Mrs. Alina, your family's legacy of service is extraordinary, and every American owes you and your children and your father and grandfather a debt of gratitude. James, thank you for your service as well, and for standing by your wife. Diego, your mother is an incredible role model, and I hope you're proud of her. Carmen, thank you for continuing the family tradition of service. You are all exactly what makes America great, the willingness to serve, to sacrifice, to stand up for what's right. The audience stood and applauded for several minutes, many people crying, everyone moved by what they'd witnessed. Steve then made a decision about how to proceed. We're going to take a break. The Patterson family, or what's left of them, you can decide if you want to continue or not. The Rodriguez family, you've already won as far as I'm concerned, but if you want to finish the game, we'll finish it. If you want to stop, we'll stop. This is your call. Maria, after conferring with her family, decided they would continue. We didn't come here to be insulted, but we also didn't come here to let ignorance stop us from doing what we came to do. We'll finish the game. Steve smiled, clearly proud of her response. The Patterson family members, minus Derek, decided to withdraw, saying they couldn't continue in good conscience after what had happened. Steve awarded both families the prize money, $20,000 each, saying the Rodriguez family had earned it through their service and their grace under pressure, and the remaining Patterson family members had earned it by standing up against racism in their own family. The episode, heavily edited but with the core confrontation intact, aired 4 weeks later with extensive commentary from Steve about racism, respect for military service, and the responsibility everyone has to stand against bigotry. The show included educational segments about Latino Americans in military service, statistics about the contributions of immigrant communities to national defense, and resources for people dealing with racial prejudice. The response was overwhelming and mostly positive. Millions of people praised Steve for taking a stand, for refusing to allow racism on his platform, and for honoring Maria's service. Military veterans of all backgrounds shared the episode, many commenting that they had faced similar prejudice despite their service. Latino service members and veterans shared their own stories of being questioned about their patriotism or citizenship despite wearing the uniform. The episode sparked important conversations about the intersection of racism and military service, about who gets to be considered a real American, and about the responsibility public figures have to use their platforms to stand against hatred. However, there was also backlash. Some people accused Steve of overreacting, of stifling free speech, of being politically correct. Derek Patterson himself went on social media claiming he was the real victim, that he'd been canceled for expressing his opinion, that Steve had been unfair to him. He started appearing on certain media outlets that gave platform to his grievances, painting himself as someone who'd been censored for speaking uncomfortable truths. But the majority of public opinion was firmly against Derek and firmly in support of Steve's actions. Other military families came forward with stories of facing similar prejudice, and several advocacy organizations used the incident as a catalyst for campaigns against racism toward service members from minority communities. 3 months after the incident, Steve invited Maria and her family back for a special segment. They arrived to a standing ovation, and the audience's warmth was palpable. Steve asked Maria how she and her family were doing after experiencing such public racism and after the episode had aired. "It was hard," Maria admitted. "Having my patriotism questioned, having assumptions made about my citizenship and my reasons for serving, it hurt deeply. But it also opened up important conversations. I've heard from hundreds of other Latino service members who have experienced similar things, who have been told they don't look American enough or asked where they're really from even though they were born here. The fact that it happened publicly, the fact that you stood up and said it was unacceptable, that gave voice to a lot of people who have experienced this kind of prejudice in silence." She continued, "What people need to understand is that racism doesn't disappear just because you put on a uniform. If anything, it becomes more painful because you're literally fighting for a country where some people think you don't belong, where some people question whether you're really American despite your willingness to die for American values and freedom." Maria shared that in the months since the incident, she'd been invited to speak at military events, diversity conferences, and schools about her experience, about Latino contributions to military service, and about what patriotism really means. Steve asked Alina, Maria's mother, to share her perspective as someone whose family had served for generations. Alina spoke with quiet dignity. "My father fought in World War II with the most decorated unit in American military history, the 442nd Infantry Regiment, which was mostly Japanese Americans fighting for a country that had put their families in internment camps. He came home to a hero's welcome in some places and to no Mexicans allowed signs in others. My husband fought in Vietnam, came home to protesters calling him a baby killer, and spent the rest of his life dealing with PTSD and Agent Orange exposure that eventually killed him. My daughters have both served, one in Afghanistan, one in the Navy, continuing a tradition of service despite knowing that some Americans will never see them as fully American no matter what they sacrifice." She paused, tears in her eyes. "What happened on this show, what Derek Patterson said, that was not new to us. We've heard versions of those comments our whole lives. What was new was having someone like Steve stand up and say loudly and publicly that it was wrong, that it was unacceptable, and that military service and American identity are not owned by one particular group of people." The audience applauded, and Steve nodded solemnly. "Mrs. Alina, your family's sacrifice and service humble me. And I want everyone watching to understand something crucial. When we allow racism to go unchallenged, when we stay silent in the face of bigotry, when we shrug off hateful comments as just someone's opinion, we are complicit. We are telling the victims of that hatred that their dignity and humanity matter less than the comfort of not confronting prejudice." Steve turned to the camera with a powerful message. "I want to talk directly to everyone watching right now, particularly to people who might hold prejudiced views or who might stay silent when they hear others express them. First, to people who think like Derek Patterson, who make assumptions about someone's citizenship or patriotism based on their ethnicity, who think military service is about benefits rather than sacrifice, who believe American identity belongs to some people more than others. You are wrong. America has always been diverse. American military service has always included people from every background, and your prejudice doesn't make you patriotic. It makes you un-American because you're rejecting the very values of equality and freedom that define what America is supposed to be. He continued, his passion evident. Second, to people who hear racist comments and stay silent because you don't want to make waves, you don't want to be uncomfortable, you think it's not your business, I'm telling you that silence is complicity. When you hear someone make a racist comment and you say nothing, you're telling the person being targeted that they're not worth defending. You're telling the person making the comment that their behavior is acceptable. You're contributing to a culture where prejudice thrives because good people don't want to deal with the awkwardness of confronting it. Steve shared his own experiences with racism, with being profiled, with having his accomplishments dismissed, with facing prejudice throughout his career. I know what it feels like to be judged based on stereotypes instead of your actual character and accomplishments. I know what it feels like to have people make assumptions about you before you even open your mouth. And I know the particular pain of facing that prejudice while serving your country, while trying to represent American values, while literally putting your life on the line for people who will never see you as fully American. That's why I couldn't stay silent when Derek Patterson said what he said. That's why I removed him from my stage. And that's why I will continue to use my platform to stand against racism wherever I encounter it. Steve then shared some important facts that many people didn't know. Latino Americans are one of the fastest-growing demographics in military service, representing about 17% of active-duty military despite being about 19% of the total U.S. population. Over 500,000 Hispanic Americans have served in combat since September 11, 2001. 60 Hispanic Americans have received the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration, dating back to the Civil War. In World War II, more than 500,000 Hispanic Americans served, despite facing segregation and discrimination both in the military and at home. These are not people serving for benefits or citizenship, Steve emphasized. These are patriots who love this country enough to fight for it, who believe in American values enough to defend them, and who deserve our respect and gratitude, not our suspicion or contempt. The segment concluded with a powerful moment. Maria's son Diego, who had been largely quiet during the appearances, spoke up with permission from his mother. I'm 17 years old, and I've been thinking about joining the military like my mom and my aunt and my grandfather and great-grandfather. But watching what happened to my mom, hearing someone question her patriotism after everything she's sacrificed, it made me wonder if it's worth it, if I'll be respected for my service, or if people will always see my last name before they see my uniform. The audience went silent, the weight of his words landing heavily. But then I watched Steve stand up for my mom, watched millions of people defend her, watched other veterans come forward with support, and I realized that the Derek Pattersons of the world don't represent real America. Real America is the diverse military my mom describes, where people from every background work together toward common goals. Real America is people like Steve using their voice to stand against hatred. Real America is worth fighting for, even if it's not perfect, even if there are still people who don't get it. The standing ovation lasted several minutes, and there wasn't a dry eye in the studio. 6 months after the original incident, there was a surprising development. Derek Patterson reached out to the show requesting an opportunity to appear and apologize. After extensive discussions and with Maria's consent, the meeting was arranged with professional mediators present. Derek appeared on the show looking different than he had before, humbler, less defensive, more aware of the gravity of what he'd done. He spoke directly to Maria and her family. Captain Rodriguez, I owe you and your family an apology that I should have given 6 months ago instead of defending my actions and playing the victim. What I said to you was racist, hurtful, and wrong. It was based on prejudices I've carried my whole life, prejudices I learned from my family and my community, prejudices I never questioned because they were comfortable and they made me feel superior to other people. He continued, his voice shaking. After I was removed from the show, I was angry. I blamed you, I blamed Steve, I blamed everyone except myself. But as time went on, as I saw the reaction to what I'd said, as I lost friends and business and relationships because of my behavior, I started to question whether maybe everyone else wasn't wrong, maybe I was wrong. I started reading, learning about Latino contributions to American history and military service, listening to stories from veterans of color about their experiences. And I realized that my ignorance was willful, that I had chosen to believe stereotypes instead of facts because the stereotypes made me feel better about myself. Derek acknowledged that his apology didn't undo the harm, didn't erase what he'd said, and didn't obligate Maria to forgive him. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, though I would be grateful if you could give it someday. I'm just asking that you know I recognize how wrong I was, that I'm working to change, and that I'm deeply sorry for the pain I caused you and your family." Maria listened to his apology, then took a moment before responding. "Mr. Patterson, I appreciate that you've done some reflection and that you're acknowledging the harm you caused. I do forgive you, not because you've earned it or because what you said was okay, but because carrying anger and resentment is a burden I don't want to carry. Forgiveness is for me, not for you," she continued, her voice firm but not unkind. "But forgiveness doesn't mean what you did doesn't have consequences, and it doesn't mean we're friends now or that everything is fine. You said something that revealed deep prejudices, and changing those prejudices takes more than a few months of reflection. It takes a lifetime of continued work, of catching yourself when you make assumptions, of speaking up when others express prejudice, of actively working to understand and respect people different from you." Maria challenged Derek directly. "If you're serious about change, prove it through your actions. Volunteer with veteran organizations that serve diverse communities. Support businesses owned by immigrants and minorities. Speak up when you hear other people express the kinds of views you used to hold. Use your experience to help other people recognize and confront their own prejudices. That's how you turn this painful experience into something meaningful." Derek agreed to all of this, and in fact reported that he'd already started volunteering with a local veterans organization and attending diversity workshops. The meeting ended with a handshake between Derek and Maria, not a restoration of relationship, but an acknowledgement of accountability and grace. The follow-up episode showing Derek's apology and Maria's response generated even more conversation than the original incident. Some people praised Derek for taking accountability and doing the work to change. Others questioned whether his transformation was genuine or just damage control. Many praised Maria for her grace in forgiving while still maintaining boundaries and challenging Derek to prove his change through action. Relationship experts and psychologists used the exchange as an example of how accountability and forgiveness can work in cases of racial harm. 1 year after the incident, a documentary was made about the impact of that Family Feud moment. It featured interviews with Maria and her family, with Derek Patterson talking about his journey from defensiveness to accountability, with Steve Harvey discussing his decision to take a stand, and with dozens of military veterans from diverse backgrounds sharing their own experiences with racism and prejudice in and out of uniform. The documentary explored the statistics about minority representation in military service, the history of segregation and discrimination in the armed forces, the ongoing challenges faced by service members of color, and the work being done to create more inclusive and respectful military culture. It showed how one moment on a game show had sparked national conversation, had given voice to thousands of people with similar experiences, and had demonstrated both the persistence of prejudice and the possibility of change when people are held accountable and challenged to grow. The documentary ended with a powerful segment showing the impact of Steve's stand. Dozens of other public figures, celebrities, and everyday people shared stories about times they'd witnessed racism and had been inspired by Steve's example to speak up instead of staying silent. Teachers talked about using the incident in their classrooms to discuss prejudice, patriotism, and respect. Military commanders discussed using it in diversity training. Parents described watching it with their children and using it to teach about standing up to bullying and hatred. The ripple effects of one moment of courage, of one person refusing to allow hatred to go unchallenged, extended far beyond that initial confrontation. Before we close this powerful story, I need you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because stories like this remind us that remaining silent in the face of bigotry is not neutrality, it's complicity, and that using whatever platform or voice we have to stand against hatred is not just morally right, it's necessary if we want to build the kind of society we claim to believe in. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below about times you've witnessed prejudice and whether you spoke up or stayed silent, and what you learned from that experience. And remember that respect for military service means respecting all who serve regardless of their background, that American identity belongs to everyone who believes in and upholds American values, and that the diversity of our military is one of its greatest strengths, not a weakness to be questioned or dismissed. Maria Rodriguez continues to serve her country with distinction, and is now working with military diversity initiatives to improve the experience of minority service members. Her family's legacy of service continues, with her son Diego having recently enlisted following his high school graduation, carrying forward the tradition his great-great-grandfather started over 80 years ago. Elena Rodriguez has become an advocate for families of veterans, particularly those from minority communities, ensuring their stories are told and their sacrifices recognized. Derek Patterson, to his credit, has maintained his commitment to change, volunteering regularly with veteran organizations, speaking at community events about his journey from prejudice to accountability, and using his experience to challenge others to examine their own biases before those biases cause irreparable harm. Steve Harvey continues to use his platform to address social issues, to stand against injustice, and to model what it means to use fame and influence for more than just entertainment. The lesson from that day on the Family Feud stage is simple but profound. When we witness hatred, we have a choice: remain silent and allow it to continue, or speak up and make it clear that such behavior is unacceptable. Steve chose to speak up, to remove someone from his stage rather than allow racism to go unchallenged. And in doing so, he sent a message that resonated far beyond that studio, that every person deserves dignity and respect regardless of their background, and that those who have sacrificed to defend our freedoms deserve our gratitude, not our prejudice. The story of Maria Rodriguez and her family is ultimately not about the hatred they faced, but about the grace with which they handled it, the dignity they maintained under attack, and the values they continue to embody through their service. They represent the best of what America can be: diverse, dedicated, principled, and resilient, and they remind us that true patriotism is measured not by where you came from, but by what you're willing to sacrifice for the ideals and values you believe in.